It's Stevivor's Friendly Fire Show, episode 211 for September 2022. I'm one of your co-hosts, Steve Wright, and joining me is my friend and yours, Mr. Ben Salter. Hi, Ben. Let's get into it. How is your internet?
Well, it's not fiber to the premises yet, but a man did come to my house. He dug up my driveway. He cut some cement and made a big hole, and there's now a box on the outside of my house, which is fiber leading into it. And now that needs to have another man come to the house and connect it to the actual boxy thing on the inside, which is happening next Friday, apparently. So not this episode, Steve, not the next episode, but at some point after that, it will be hopefully magical.
And like in 3 weeks from now, you're maybe going to be broadcasting live from outside your house, just like
could be
jacked into that box because it's...
Look, I already know what's going to happen. The guy's going to come and he's going to be like, oh, we need to run it through like the ceiling of the garage to get it to the study, which is the next wall over. And he's going to be like, oh, we don't get paid enough of that. And so it's going to get like pushed in the wrong spot, be a whole thing. So maybe I'll just do that. Maybe I'll just sit outside and have my nice fiber internet out there.
Well, there you go. When they finally connected the HTC, is that what it is? HFC. Thank you. Like something that didn't sound right. When they finally connected the HFC to my house, then they just kind of like drilled through a wall into my garage and went, yeah, that's enough. That's done. And like the guy who was helping the NBN contractor, there was like 5 of them, and they were doing like all the houses in the townhouses that we live in. He's like, oh man, you should really get him to try to move that inside your house. I'm like, yeah, I am. Trust me, I really am. And he's like, nah, too hard, pal. We'll just leave it here. Like, yeah, all right. So, it was like that weird thing of like, we have the internet, it's fast. I'm just not going to complain anymore because it's in my garage at least, and I have the know-how to get it through the rest of my house.
Yeah, that's the next plan. Anyhow, we're through that. Well, we're not through that. It's still ongoing, but soon at some point.
Well, hopefully it's resolved soon. I will continually ask you for updates as we are wont to do. My hockey team made it to the grand final. And we've played one game of a best of 3 and we kicked their butts. So this coming Friday, we will put the final nail in their coffin. So I'll tell you all about it whenever I remember next time, because it's not in an ideal time. And like, I'll probably forget because that's right. How I roll.
We can recreate it in NHL 23, 24, whatever year you're up to now. At
23. And it's not being renamed EA Sports Hockey Club or something next year,
why not?
Well, just go for it. Just like burn every bridge, just get rid of any licensed property and just go loot boxes. I don't know. It's been a long week. It's partially been a long week, and I don't know when I calculate weeks from at this point, Ben, but it's been a long period of days because of a little Sony title that was re-released, depending on who you ask, called The Last of Us Part 1. I've said a lot about it on the internet, and I'm keen to see if you have any takes or if I'm just going to talk, but let's jump into it.
Well, let's very quickly go to the start. You really liked the original game, so 2013. Did you give it the 10, or did someone else
Matt Gosper gave it a 10, but it's on my list of like the 10 best games of the last 10 years or so. That was a couple years old. Yeah. So I loved it. It was a great game. Super compelling.
You in no way are against the game. You love the game.
I surely do.
Your most recent review was about the remaster itself, and that as a product, which is what it should be, because you can still play that original and you can play the last remaster from 2014 on your PS5, and it runs pretty well. I played it not that long ago when Last of Us Part 2 came out. I went back and played remastered, and it's a bit dated, but it's what you would expect in terms of gameplay.
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily think it needed a remake or a second remaster, or the easiest way to say it, because I got absolutely flamed for calling this a remaster. A third version of the game within 9 years.
Correct.
Who cares if you call it a remaster, remake, whatever? I don't really care. They're all interchangeable, these terms these days, because people use them differently.
Yes,
I personally
and
believe
we had an entire episode about that not too long ago.
we have that. To quickly recap, what we said then is basically if you're fully remaking the game, that's what we'd call a remake. The gameplay needs to be remade because gameplay is king. If you're prettying it up, you're improving the aesthetics, the sound, all that type of stuff. Think of it like a song. That's considered a remaster. In the same way that the movie gets kind of redone for a higher resolution format, that's a remaster. So I think that's pretty consistent. There's always going to be grey areas of which one does it fall into. But frankly, I don't really care. If you call this a remaster, remake, whatever you want to call it, it's the third version within 9 years. That is what we can all agree on. And that is where it's a little harder to see why it exists so soon.
Especially at a price tag of $125 Australian. And that, yeah, like, and this is where, like, I hate the internet, really, because everyone is acting as if, like, cost is the only thing I factored into my words. And there are, like, 1,000 of them. You should read them. I think I make a fairly compelling argument as to my reasons behind the 6.5 score. Like you were saying, this is the third game. It's the third version of this game in 9 years. A year after it was released on PS3, it was put on PS4 as remastered. And the game was amazing, and people should play it, and it's great. And if you were one of the people, and there were many of them, because think about the climate back in the time. Not a lot of people had a PS3, because 360 crushed it. So people might have skipped the PS3 like they skipped the Xbox One the generation after. So, like, in my mind, yeah, it was a year after this game was released. That's a little bit too soon. That's kind of double dipping into wallets. But maybe people didn't have a PS3, and it's a really good way to play this, like, phenomenal Naughty Dog game on the PS4, which everybody and their dog had. A year after that release, the gameplay still felt current because it was 2014, I think, at the time, and not 2013. So, like, all the things that we have kind of seen evolve in that time hadn't happened yet. So, like, it didn't feel as jarring. Despite, you know, claims of the remake and, like, all this enhanced AI and this and that and the other, like, it still very much plays like a PS3 game. And it looks like a PS5 game. It looks absolutely phenomenal. But I did, anyway, just kept headbutting against those, like, kind of older, not horribly designed things, but, like, just older pieces of functionality. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and that's the crux of it. If you've never played this game before and you want the gorgeousest version of it, by all means, drop $125. But if you don't mind if it looks a little bit older and has pretty much 99% of the same gameplay, save $100 and get The Last of Us remastered PS4 version for PS5. That made sense. Yeah. Cool. So, yeah. I don't know if there's much more to say about it. Like, we weren't just going on cost. We were going on how the gameplay is dated, how it's the third release in so long. If it was on PlayStation Plus in some capacity, if it was cheaper, that would have factored into these things. And I think that's the thing here. Like, cost has to factor into a review, not in every, you know, like 100% of the criteria, of course, but, like, it has to in some way. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I think we have a topic planned. You might see a theme running through today. It's just disappointing that it's $125 in Australia to play a really gorgeous game that still handles like a PS3 game. So it's like a fresh coat of paint on something that you might have already dropped like $200 on in the last 10 years.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, and there's definitely a market for that. There's, as other people have said, there are people who haven't played this game yet who will love it to such a degree they will be willing to pay the top price for the absolute best version of it. And there's no doubt this is the best version if you're not worried about the cost.
Yeah.
But if you're less certain of if you're going to love it, or you just kind of want to dabble in it, then there's a much cheaper option which plays about the same. And I still think that if you're a gameplay is king type of person, you'd go for that. And that's for a lot of people, that's why you're looking at a review. Should I, especially for a remake or a remaster, that's why I'm looking at this version. In the same way you might look at a review for a phone and kind of think, should I upgrade from my previous version of this same phone? Should I get the premium top-end model for way more money for a few more features? And that's what you're considering when you're looking at value. And a game is in much the way the same thing. Or to compare it to other media, it's a really detailed review of the Blu-ray versus the HD Blu-ray, which costs like massively different for some reason.
Yeah.
A 4K version, I should say, 4K Blu-ray. is way more expensive. But if you're really into something, you're probably willing to pay it. Most people will probably say, you know what, if for some reason I want the disc, I will buy the Blu-ray, or if I'm happy with the streamed version, I'll just stream it somewhere. And they don't necessarily need that extra cost. So similar thing to factor in here.
Yeah, and like they've the lighting is amazing. The character models, like I think some of them are literally just from The Last of Us Part 2. Like they look like PS5 assets. They are PS5 assets. Character models I've already talked about. I'm talking about performance captures, where my brain was going. Like it is amazing, but like the performance capture is in cutscenes. And, you know, like you play through the first 15 minutes and it's like extremely compelling. And it's like they've never looked more realistic, and the responses and the reactions have never looked more realistic. But there's something, in my mind at least, is detracted from the experience, because I know exactly what's going to happen at the end of that 15-minute prologue. And I know exactly what's going to happen, you know, at the midpoint of the game. I know exactly what's going to happen at the end of the game. So all of those amazing performances would definitely have resonated with me more if they were new and I was experiencing this for the first time. But like, I've retread this story at least 3 times. I've played probably Remastered twice. I've played The Last of Us twice. So it looks gorgeous, but like, I don't know if I would be prepared to pay or recommend that people pay $125 for that. Like, you could go on YouTube right now and watch 4K captures of all the cutscenes if you really wanted to get that nuance. It doesn't really factor into the gameplay, and the gameplay is where it's a little bit dated. Like, you know, because it was really always about having some sort of AI companion with you at all times, usually Ellie. Tess at the start, like you'll walk into an encounter and Joel's crouched over stealthy, like we can't let any of these 7 goons see us or we'll surely be done for. And like the AI companion you have is just like walking out in front of them, like forgetting it should be like in a stealth animation crouched, and you're like, oh well. Like, it doesn't affect my gameplay. They don't see this character, like, that's right in front of them, like, running into them. But it's like, that was 2013. And I'm sure there's a better way to do it now, and you wouldn't, you know, have that happen. And even just, like, the things where, like, your flashlight goes out and you have to tap the DualShock, or the DualSense now, to turn your flashlight back on. I'm like, I just don't make motion control the thing I have to do. Like, it's like the Uncharted games where you had to, like, scrub on the touchpad or something to, like, do something with the map. It's like, I don't need that. But anyway, like, it does really look amazing. There's other cool things, I guess, about it that we can talk about. It seems like maybe, or just hopeful fans have potentially found the next Naughty Dog IP kind of just Easter egged in here. Yeah. How much do you know about this?
What you wrote on the internet is what I know about it.
What our new intern, Ethan Dean, wrote on the internet, actually.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Hi, Ethan. Yeah. We'll get you on soon, just not today.
It's, so it's basically just some fantasy assets, a dragon, that type of thing, which is suggesting a possible new fantasy game from Naughty Dog. And people believe this because they did the same thing in Uncharted 3 to tease The Last of Us 1. So it would absolutely make sense they're doing it again now. We don't know what else they're working on, so it seems like they'll be doing something new. I don't think they're going straight into another Last of Us game. They've never done that since they've been kind of on and off Uncharted, Last of Us. They've kind of alternated. Doesn't seem like they're going back to Uncharted. So something new is probably in the pipeline.
Yeah, it's that, like, I know Neil Druckmann's kind of busy with the HBO TV show, but I feel like Naughty Dog and Sony Santa Monica are doing the same kind of thing right now. Like, Cory Barlog isn't doing Ragnarok, or he's like involved in it, obviously, but he's not the head honcho. It's someone else. Just like Druckmann wasn't, you know, like the driving force of Part 1, because they're doing the next thing. Like, this is the like interim project to take both these studios to the next thing. And that's really cool, because like the 2018 God of War, whenever that came out, was really good. Like The Last of Us, like Part 2 rubbed me a little in some bad ways, but like they're good, compelling narratives. Like, they're good. So like, if there's something cool and new coming out that involves dragons, maybe it'll scratch that, like, what was that canceled Platinum game? Was it Platinum? Scalebound. Yeah. Maybe it'll scratch that itch. So no one loses in this case, which is good.
Yeah.
So,
well, yeah, that's cool. So while we're on the topic of generally cost of things, I think that's where we're leading. To recap very briefly, in Australia last generation, pretty much all games had a recommended price of $99.95, so $100. And Sony's brought that up to $125 this generation for its first-party game. So a pretty big jump. And I know they've gone 60 to 70 in the US, but it still feels like we've gone a little further than they have. At least mentally, like that's a big jump. Because a bunch of other publishers this gen have gone to 110, so they're not on their own Sony. Not everyone's done that. And a bunch did last generation as well. And then kind of after a year or so, after that cross-gen period ended, they kind of just went back to 100. And it has to be said that our dollar was pretty strong at that point in time, so maybe that had something to do with it. Meanwhile, Switch has reduced itself to $79.95. I think previous generations for Nintendo were more than that. So they've gone the other way, but they've also gone in some middle ground between a handheld and a console. So I think that's probably why.
And also, I guess, to throw something into that wrench really quickly, the $79.95 like Nintendo price Switch game generally will stay at that price until the end of time. Whereas Sony and Microsoft, all the third-party publishers will eventually reduce the cost of their games, depending. Because, like, I think Bandai Namco is really smart now that Elden Ring's done so well. Like, they've left the prices of all the old Dark Souls games like at a pretty hefty rate. But anyway, I digress. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yes, especially Bethesda. Their games seem to go down to about $25 within 3 to 6 months every time. You can get Deathloop and even Ghostwire Tokyo was on Amazon for $25 last week. So their games never hold value. Don't know why, just how it is. So I suppose if we put reviews aside, just generally speaking, is cost a factor when, I guess, first buying a new game? Do people, or should people, or do you consider the cost of a new release, and should you wait for it to drop? As you just said, most of the time games do, unless it's a Nintendo game. And then is it different for a remaster or remake, something that's older, something that you've potentially already played? Do you expect that to be cheaper?
I want to talk about reviews at a certain point, but we won't do that yet. But I guess, like, I'm trying... As a
consumer first.
Oh, yeah. But, like, I guess I'm trying to think as a consumer, and it's hard to, because you and I generally don't have to pay for these games that we're playing most of the time. And if I had to pay for all of the games that I have in my library, I would be broke. So I guess as a consumer, you have to think about how much budget you can put towards games and then work with that budget. And I know that budget's going to be different for every single person out there, but like that could mean that some person has to buy one game that'll like take them through 3 months, or it could be someone can buy a game every 2 days. So it's like, I'm not answering your question. Yeah. But like, yeah, I think you have to think about cost and your situation, of course. And like, I will stop talking about reviews, but like, you have to kind of factor that in as some point of writing. I guess another factor to think about, like, and there are people that do this, and like that Avatar game on Xbox 360 is a great example because I found it for like $10 and I bought it because it was an easy 1,000 gamer score. Like, it's not even like a new game or a remake or a remaster. It's like, oh, is there easy achievements or easy trophies? And like, you're thinking about cost in one of those factors even a little bit. And it might just be like, nah, I got money to burn. Like, but it might be, no, like I need to really be careful about what I buy. Or, you know, like in the case of The Last of Us, do I save $100 and play a version of the game, which is still the same story from start to finish and roughly the same gameplay, you know, maybe without improved AI pathing or whatever. But like, if I don't spend $100 there, I can buy $100 game on top of that. I think there's a lot of weird stuff going on. Like, I don't really think it's sound for Sony to charge $125 for a PS5 game when Microsoft is, you know, doing the smart delivery thing and giving you versions of Xbox and Xbox or Xbox One and Xbox Series games for like $100. But like, they're getting away with it. I don't think it's great that 2K is charging like that extra premium for like their current gen games. I think there's a lot of.
But so is Microsoft. I think they're charging $110 now.
Are they?
So is Activision. So is EA.
Okay.
Depends what it is. Well, Microsoft's a bit different in that they do the get it on Game Pass or buy it the special fancy edition and get it 3 days early or whatever. So there's harder to tell what they're doing. But certainly Activision, who may soon be part of Microsoft, they charge their $110 now.
And there's, like the cross-buy bundles that there's a lot of like sports games, the NBAs and the FIFAs that are like spend $130 and you'll get the PS4 and the PS5 version, or the Xbox and the Xbox versions because you get 2 different achievement and trophy sets. Like, I don't know, it's just If people are buying them, that's telling these companies that they can do it. So I guess that's kind of the bottom line. Like, is it acceptable? Maybe not, but are we accepting it? Yes.
And that's the whole point. Before we touch on should we be talking about this in reviews, if we, not to harp on The Last of Us, but it is a strange situation having 3 games in 9 years. And also having the third version be 25% more expensive than the last 2 versions were when they launched. I know inflation's played a role there, but we just talk sticker prices. That's what it is. That's super rare. I can't remember that happening pretty much ever. We did get criticized for not all about scores, all people care about, but they said we didn't take cost into consideration enough with Skyward Sword HD. But I will dispute that in that it is, I think it should have been cheaper. I think $80 for that game is too much. I think Nintendo need a budget of price in there, which they used to have. They used to have like a 50 or a 60. But like you say, they can get away with it, so they don't need to. But the Wii recommended retail price for a Wii game in Australia was $100, and now it's $80. So it did actually launch cheaper. It certainly didn't go up from what the Wii version was. So different situation, and it's also the second version of a game within 12 years or something. It's not the third one. So different situation there. And then if you look at other remasters, remakes, re-releases, there's different ways to look at that value in there. So Mass Effect Legendary Edition is a great example of a recent kind of remaster that's similar, but probably to a lesser extent than The Last of Us. Its gameplay is still dated.
Yeah. It's like the PS4 remastered version of The Last of Us if we're trying to equate it. But it's the 3 games. One is like ancient and gross, Mass Effect, and they tweaked it a bit. Sorry, I cut you off. You keep going.
I liked it. I would say it's in between the two. So in 2014, when Last of Us 1 Remastered came out, that's what we expected from a remaster. It was a pretty technological jump from the 360 PS3 to the 1 PS4.
60 frames.
And 60 frames and getting it up to 1080. We didn't have full HD for games at that point. So it was a decent jump. And we expect a bit more now, which we got with Mass Effect. I thought it did have some new assets, but not a lot. It was mainly the resolution and some tweaks, mostly, as you say, to the first game that needed the most work.
Yeah.
And they were just, it was made a more cohesive package than the 3 games separately are. And I think for $100, so that didn't get the price increase because it was technically the last gen game. Decent value, because when you break it down to $30 a game, that seems okay, but it's still you still have to outlay the same amount of money, but you get a lot of games for that. And I think most people
a lot of games, but not just a lot of games, like a lot of gameplay hours. That's like at least I'd say 60 hours of gameplay. So if you're looking for depending on if you're going to play all 3, how far you go into like the role playing, but like 60 is probably a minimum. I think it probably took me like 80 to go through and like do everything I wanted, go all through all the side missions, like really just like invest myself. And that's a really good return on investment in my opinion.
Yeah. Two things on that. One is longer gameplay doesn't mean better game and better value necessarily.
Oh, of course it doesn't. Because then you have the Ubisoft like Valhallas of the world where it's just like a map full of icons. But this is for 3 games, so like
over 3 games. Having played them, I would say Mass Effect 3 was the weakest because I thought it was too long. I really liked the length. Like 1 is the shortest, and I quite like that length. Anyhow, that's each person. Again, all relative. Your own opinion on that.
Exactly.
The thing which I think so many did. Now, I guess, move into the area of what should we consider in a review is so many critics who, as you say, we don't have to pay for every game we get. We don't have to pay for a lot of games we get, if we're totally honest. For that factor, they kind of forget how much it adds up if you play a bunch of different games. And there's this whole market of people who can't afford that. Think back to when you were a kid and you got 2 games a year.
Yep.
The value is super important. If you're saving up to buy these yourself, the cost is super important. And that is where, hey, I get 3 games for my money with Mass Effect. And also kind of knowing that if I wait 6 months, 9 months, it's going to come down at least half price again. So maybe I should wait. Like, I think that knowing when to wait, knowing when this is actually really worth spending that extra money is important for a huge market of people older people like us who don't, even if we did have to buy games, we could have probably afford to get the ones we want to now. But that wasn't always the case. Like, every uni student ever has to pick and choose. It's just your point in time. When you're at that stage of life. And I used to think it was really important when I was reading reviews back then to kind of see what I wanted to do and what I wanted to play. People's opinion on value and if you need to play it now was a big part of it. I think it's going to be spoiled for you. Is it not going to be as fun in a few months if it's a multiplayer game because people jump off? Or is it worth waiting for a little while like a Mass Effect? And it will still be great. Like, that was important to me at the time.
Yep. And like a big thing that I have a problem with is I don't have patience. I know there's an entire Reddit for patient gamers, and they're playing games from like 5 years ago that they got for $10, and I'm like, if I could do that, I would love to do that, but I need to be on it straight away. Like, so like getting it at a discount's not a big thing for me. So if I'm writing, it's like this person is like on the edge. They're deciding if they want to buy it or not. And like that is a factor. There's way more other factors. And you've already talked about Zelda. People have been throwing my Alan Wake remastered review in my face. Like, you gave this a 10, it's the same thing. That's like, well, it was $30. It was substantially cheaper. And it was the first time this game has been re-released in 10 years, not the third or second, I guess. Sorry. And it was also a game that was like in a cult status. So kind of like The Last of Us again. It was like, oh, maybe you missed it on PS3 because you didn't get it on PS3. It's on PS4 now. And yes, good, great. Alan Wake on 360 probably wasn't played by a lot of people. It's the first time it's made to PlayStation. Like, there's all these people who didn't have access to this game 10 years later that now can play it. I love that game, like, just as much, more than The Last of Us. It was number 1 on my top 10 games of the thing I was talking about before. But it was also like to hype up and build anticipation for Alan Wake 2, not a TV show. Like, I guess that's what The Last of Us Part 1 is doing. Like, I don't know. Like, it's just I'm not in a vacuum. Like, I am trying to assess multifacets of things to try to get to a decision as to why it's good. People were also saying like, oh, so if Saints Row was $40, would you have given it an 8? Like, no, because it was bad. Like, it's underbaked, it's undercooked. It doesn't matter if it was free. It's not a good game. Like, cost isn't everything when you come into, if you like a game, let alone how you potentially review a game.
Yes.
And like when things like, oh, it's a free-to-play game, you must think it's amazing, 10 out of 10 because it's free. It's like, well, multiverses can have a lot of fun and engagement if you like the Smash style thing, but also like a Batman skin costs like $30, and that's garbage too. Like, you can't ignore cost. You don't have to obsess about cost. But, that's as important as design, gameplay, UI, functionality, like anything. It's like it's a portion of how you assess something as a consumer or writing about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly now that we're getting way more remasters, remakes than we ever have before, like there are so many. And part of that is that we're in a new generation, so it's a great time to do it for publishers. Part of it is the pandemic, which has slowed down development, so it's a quick way to, or it's in some cases the only way to get some games out. And some of it's just because they obviously sell. So like, we may as well do stuff. Do you think EA would have bothered doing 3 Mass Effect games if they didn't think that was definitely going to sell a bunch of load? And it did. So like, they'll probably do, well, they're remaking Dead Space now.
Yeah.
So like, I think the fact that we're getting more means we're starting to kind of maybe in some way get over them. But probably expecting more is the big thing. It's the early days when they were pretty rare. So like, to go back to Last of Us remastered the first time, there weren't that many remasters then. It was early in the generation. It was actually kind of cool to have that game on PS4 and running better. I didn't play it right away because I just played it, but a lot of people, as you say, probably missed it. Maybe they swapped to PlayStation that generation. Great time to release that game. But that happening now, we're in a time when the same upgrades, a lot of them are free. And then a lot of them are small fees. So I think like Rockstar's charging $15 or something for GTA 5, or they were for a period of time. I think that's fair enough in some situations.
Yeah.
But then, to go up to a full remake for $125 seems to be, they seem to be trying to see where the line is and see how far they can kind of stretch that.
Yeah.
Which is fun.
And like the timing is a bit sus as well. Like we've all, like I did too, we all played a little bit at least of remastered on PS4, or like those who were so inclined and those who were excited about Part 2 coming out before Part 2. So it's not been that long since you've replayed that game already. And like if they release this for 125 with a copy of Part 2, different story. Like that's borderline great value. Like it seems unfriendly to consumers, and it feels like Sony knew they could get away with this. They like went and did some, market research and decided this was a good price point, and like good for them. Like, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up my uncomfortability, that's a word, with the decision.
I think they don't want to devalue their products. They want to try to do what Nintendo's done at a higher price point, and just doesn't matter what the game is, we're launching at $125. And so I think that's why previous generations, even something like Ratchet and Clank, they might have launched a little cheaper. I can remember the PS4 version launched and it was like $60-something on the PS Store. Like it was not 100. And it's probably because they were targeting kids with that game, so they went a cheaper price point. And I think both those games are great. Good fun. Don't know that it's worth that much, being that it's a pretty short game, but good. I really like that game.
Yeah.
But back then they had different price points. It seems now they've just gone with, we're a premium first-party developer, publisher. Everything is that price. We don't want to devalue ourselves. That seems to be Jim Ryan's stance. And to a degree, fair enough. Like they do release such a strong caliber of first-party games, which Microsoft can't get close to. They're trying to by buying more studios, but they haven't proven it yet. Nintendo is probably in a similar situation, but they make smaller scale games and they release them cheaper, but they don't lose their value. And there's reason for that. Like, they don't age as much. They're probably in that great group of, you can play a Nintendo game in that Reddit group who's happy to play it 5 years later and it's still just as good, because they're not trying to push the boundary in terms of tech and gameplay innovation. Like, you know what you're getting with a Nintendo game, and mostly it's great, and they've kind of found where they can hold their value. I think Sony's trying to do the same, but at a much higher price point.
I've got a lot of people like throwing abuse my way in my head, so I apologize if I'm like harping on this too much. But like, we have this weird faults, I think. Like, what's the word I want? I've lost the word. We have there's this perception, that's not the word I want, but it'll work, that we are like love anything that Nintendo puts out. And I feel of late, Nintendo's really dropped the ball on like the half-baked golf title or the half-baked soccer title. When this podcast comes out, our review of Splatoon 3 will be out. It's in progress, and it's Jay, so I'm not going to speak for Jay, but I played like 2 hours in preview not too long ago. Splatoon 3 is Splatoon 2, but Salmon Run is always on, and there's a couple new weapons. But otherwise, it's Splatoon 2, and Nintendo wants you to pay full price for basically the same game, not too long after that game was released on the same platform. So it's not like looking any better. It's the same game basically. And there's a commitment to 2 years of content. So like, they're basically just like every sports game ever saying, give us a full priced game fee, thank you, and here's the next version, which is basically the same. And like, you look at our reviews of NHL and stuff of late, it's like, yeah, this is a crap copy paste job, because it's retreading the same stuff and they want you to pay full price, and like, we've not been kind to a lot of those releases. This like, so yeah, anyway, I will stop talking.
There is one more remake or remaster there. No, it was a remake that I should bring up, being last year's, because there have been so many Pokemon games in the last 12 months. Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl. I think that's the right way around. I gave that a 6, I think. And so again, that's a Nintendo franchise which normally does really well. Normally I really like, and it's not to say I hated this game, it just was disappointing as a remake. We expect more than that from Pokemon remakes. They normally bring the older generations up to the current standard or even better, and they didn't do that. But people kind of ignore some of those ones when it's, I suppose it's lesser known, or not the same prestige level as The Last of Us, but it potentially should be. Like, the Pokemon remakes get considered second tier for some reason, even though some of them are the best games in the series. We're not anti. We're certainly not anti Nintendo, but we're not super pro them either. We judge every game on its merit, and I think we're relatively fair with that as we see it. And people may see it differently, and that's totally fine.
Yeah. There was one guy, there's been a lot of comments, but there's one guy who's like, I read your words and I agree with most of it. I'm like, well, you don't have to agree with anything I say, but thank you for like constructively, or just at least calmly replying and not threatening my mother or something. Like, you don't have to agree. I don't like invent the universe or something. I don't make like facts come to be. Like, this is what I think about the game. You can agree. You don't have to agree. Factor it into your decision if you want to make a purchase or not. Thank you very much. This has been my TED Talk.
It'd be super boring if we all agreed about everything. Like, it's you get different opinions, and that's the whole point of it. If everything was a 10 or everything was a 2 on Metacritic, what's the point? Like, you should get different opinions, and generally there's a consensus. If you're looking for that consumer advice, you'll normally see a trend. But if you just want to see some criticism and analysis of games, it's way more interesting to have different opinions. There are some people out there who love Saints Row. Now, I think they're wrong, but
they are. But yeah,
good on them. That's what we want.
I'm glad they found enjoyment in that game, and I'm glad if you find enjoyment in The Last of Us Part 1 and you think that it was money well spent, then good. That's I don't ever want someone to buy something and be like, wow, this was a waste of my money. So good for you. If you want to buy a PlayStation 5, just kind of keeping this cost topic, you're going to have to spend, if you can find one, which I guess it's getting a little bit easier to do so, but not a lot.
Yeah.
You're going to have to drop in Australia $50 extra. So in most markets around the world, apart from the US, Sony has raised the price of both SKUs of the PS5. In Australia, it's gone with the disc-based version from $749 to $799. With the disc-less version, it's $649, used to be $599. I think we didn't do too badly in the regions. I can't remember. One of the regions had I think it's Japan had the highest percentage-wise hike. I can't remember. But yeah, it's hard to find these consoles. It's 2 years after the console was released. The console is now expensive. Is that normal? Should we be preparing for this?
Well, it's not normal historically in terms of consoles. I can't think of any other console that had its price go up after nearly 2 years for the same thing. And it's not even the same thing. They've actually managed to... so normally what would happen, to give a brief rundown, is the purpose of slim consoles is to basically shrink everything, put cheaper components in, and then you can sell it cheaper. And your marketing team does a great job of saying, look, it's a fancy new version and it's cheaper.
Yeah. But it's glossy black instead of matte black this time.
They ultimately, they don't release slim versions just to sell you a cheaper console. They do it so that they can make a cheaper console and then sell you a cheaper console.
Yeah.
Clearly, we need slim versions of these. They're obviously not ready to do that entirely. But there's a new version of the PS5. It's in Australia already. So I know people have waited, and it's a decent amount lighter than the original, but it looks the same. And there was, just before we started recording this, there was finally a teardown of it. And it's totally different on the inside. So they've totally rebuilt it, new motherboard, smaller heatsink, all that stuff. So they've clearly cut some costs on manufacturing, and they've still put the price up. Now, I know that there's inflation is crazy all over the world. I'm sure it costs them more money to make this thing. But it's not like people haven't been buying one because they were just waiting. I'm sure some people were waiting for the price to come down, but a lot of people just couldn't get one.
Yeah.
And so it's quite a slap in the face to then have to pay more because you weren't able to get one earlier. It just seems it's very anti-consumer. And I know Sony are clearly trying to make profit on hardware, which you traditionally don't do unless you're Nintendo with hardware this early.
Yeah.
Because they make a cut on every game sold. So that's where you get your money back through that.
Yeah, let's talk about attach rates, Ben.
Yeah. EB Games kind of says, what about me? Where do I make my money?
Attach rates are, you go and buy a console and you buy 3 games alongside the console. That's right. It's a console is traditionally a loss leader because you recoup the cost in games. So Sony is an example, you're charging $125 for games on top of your console. You shave a bit off the console because you're going to kind of recoup that in The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 and whatever else.
And every game sold on PlayStation, Sony takes a cut from. They take a licensing fee. I think Nintendo is 30% or something. They do a full Apple.
And Microsoft does as well. Absolutely. No one is exempt from this.
No, so that's why the stores or the digital stores are locked off on these consoles. They would love you buying everything from there because you're getting them less often on sale and they're getting a bigger cut from everything. So perfect for them. And that is why we normally don't see this type of thing. It's why pretty quickly both Nintendo and Microsoft came out and said, we're not raising our prices. Now, different situations. Xbox is by far still third place this generation. Well, I don't really know which generation Nintendo's in. So let's not talk about placing.
Well,
they're kind of in both.
Switch is still selling hand over fist. So we'll count that as a current gen console, even though it has the power of a last gen console.
Well, but then is Switch winning last generation or is it winning this generation? It's definitely winning a generation.
It almost won against the PS4, and anyway, it doesn't Nintendo's matter. Happy.
And that's exactly why they don't need to drop the price. One, they actually found a way to increase the price by releasing the Switch OLED, but that's a different model. Yeah. And two, they don't need to drop the price because this is so ancient now that they probably are making it a fair bit cheaper, and they can just kind of use that. To go back to Microsoft, they need every sale they can get, and they're a massive company, like they can absorb the extra costs. But Sony is not,
and they're
small.
Also throwing like Game Pass and like all these other sort of like kind of lost leaders at the moment, like with the long game, because like they can be propped up by Windows and every other micro. Like they're not worried about money at this point. They're like trying to build up studios. They're going to give games away on Game Pass, like not give them away. You have to pay for it, but yeah, like they're not concerned about losing money in the short term, where Sony clearly is.
Yes, and I think there's probably a few sides to it. One being the fact that you can't go into a store and buy a PS5. You can't even get one online. Like they sell out within like 10 minutes still. You can't put your name down anywhere. That stuff is still nearly 2 years in, not happening. So from that point of view, they underpriced this thing. Like it sells so quickly that they could have charged more to begin with, and they didn't, probably to match what Microsoft were doing.
Yeah.
So there is that. Like, I mean, from that point of view, potentially it should have cost more to begin with. But it's still rough to put the price up now. And I think because we had so long of like these new consoles are $750, and I remember when that price came out, people were kind of shocked because it seemed high at the time. But we got over it pretty quickly.
It still seems high, but okay, sure. It's a good statement. I'll agree, but...
Yeah. No, well, I think we got used to it is what I'm saying. Like that's just what the cost is. And if you wanted the cheaper console, there was the Series S or there's a Switch, like, or even the last gen consoles are still around. Like there were cheaper options. It was higher than we expected, I think. But we've had almost 2 years to get to accept $750. That's a price. I'm sure there are people waiting for it to drop, but we kind of got used to it. I think going up now to $800, that's like a pretty big mental block. Like if you were on the fence of like, if I'm on Twitter at the right time and I can get one, I'll nab it. If they come into stores at some point, I'll get one. Or otherwise, I'm happy to wait for a price drop at $750. You're in the 700s. Now that it's $800 now. It's gone to that next level of, oh, hang on. That's actually, we're getting, for some reason in my head, when you're hitting 800 compared to set in the sevens, I'm thinking $1,000. Like I'm getting towards that when I'm budgeting.
You buy an extra controller, you have an attach rate of one game, Ben, and you're over $1,000 at that point. Be it like 1,025 or something like that. So
yeah, it's just mentally different. That said, you bring up a good point. The PS5 does come with a controller that has a battery in it. Now, it's a terrible battery. The Xbox Series X does not have any batteries. Well, it does have batteries. It doesn't have a rechargeable battery. You can buy the Xbox One that goes in there. That's $30. It's way better than the DualSense one. It lasts way longer.
Yeah.
But you have to buy it separately, which is so, okay, fine. An Xbox costs you $780 then. Like there is that. That's something that a lot of people probably didn't consider. But it's that mental block. I think there's a huge difference between $750 and $800.
And the problem with that $800 console now is that very shortly, soon, we will have the announcement of the actual release date of PlayStation VR 2 with all of its bells and whistles, which I think will also be priced around like $700, $800 for the tech it has inside of it. Like it's going to be an expensive unit. So that's something to think about. I think the only other time that like I've been aware of like a piece of hardware going up in cost without like anything really changing is like the Meta Quest or the Meta Quest 2, like Facebook's. It's Meta's Facebook, you know what I mean? Like because they bought Oculus, they upped the price kind of with the same, explanation, inflation. Like it's expensive to make this. Like if you're taking a playbook out of Meta's book, out of Facebook's playbook, is that like? Do you honestly think that's a good idea? I can't imagine so. And like also just like at least put it up by a little bit in the States. Like make the rest of the world feel like it's not just like an us versus them situation, because it clearly is. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, and probably the last thing we can take away from this is for all of those people out there waiting for that price drop because they thought $750 was too much. There's no price drop coming anytime soon, if ever. Like Nintendo hasn't dropped the price of the Switch all generation, although it does go on sale sometimes in Australia at least.
Yeah.
But these are not dropping anytime soon. I think the Series S is way overpriced still. Maybe that could get a price drop, but like, yeah, if you can still find the odd PS5 come to stock briefly on Amazon for $750. I'm sure there's a date where that's going to stop happening, but if you see one, get it. these are not going to go cheaper anytime soon.
Yeah.
I think we might even get to like the 5, 6, 7 year mark of this generation and had no price drop. Or maybe Sony goes back to the 750. Like it seems like this is the cost, and you got a great deal if you bought a launch PS5 because
if you could find
cheaper.
one, yeah. It's like the thing in the paper, or like there was the Onion. It's like a landlord remarkably remembers to reduce cost of rent when the price of living goes down, because they're obviously hiking up rent now that the cost of living is going up. You'd like to see it go both ways, but who knows if it will. I think the demand is so high on any of these consoles, like even the Switch, like it's not like out of stock in stores, but like the turnover is crazy. Like they're just in out. Like, why would you put the cost of one of these consoles down? Because people want them and they will pay that money. I don't think the people will be that fussed over $50, but like it's still, you just wish you didn't see it, to be honest. But
yeah, well, now if the cost of living is hurting you, something you should definitely do is change the power setting mode on your Xbox, because it is costing you a fortune to not play it, as it turns out. This was probably announced a while ago, but like I didn't really see it until it kind of went over Twitter yesterday, in that leaving your Xbox Series X in standby mode uses around 11 to 13 watts, which The Verge did in UK pricing. So just a quick change to Australian dollars is about $100 a year per console to not do anything. That's when it's just in standby mode. Obviously, it uses more power when you're playing a game. And the Series S and the One are not far behind it. Whereas the PS5 uses 2 watts in rest mode, which is essentially nothing. And they both use 0.5 in their energy saving mode. So does the Switch in its sleep mode. So essentially, to wrap all that up, the Xbox is pretty power hungry when it's doing nothing, and the other two are pretty efficient.
To wrap that all up, what the hell, Microsoft? It's insane. And like something that we did cover a while ago, because Microsoft has been really good about trying to push energy saver mode, and
this is why.
Yeah, get out. And make it enticing to do so. So like you used to have to be in standby mode to download game updates overnight, if they were pushed through. Whether or not that actually worked for you is anyone's guess, because who knows. But and like whether or not it works in energy saving mode is still the same question. But at least in energy saver mode now, you can theoretically pull those updates. So Microsoft's been trying to encourage people to switch to that mode. But I guess I'm just curious as to why you would even have that option there anymore. Like, why not?
I think it's got to do with the OS, and it's too deeply ingrained for them to take it away, because as you say, they've essentially, and they didn't do a great job of announcing this, because until this came out, I didn't realize you could now download updates in Energy Saver, which was the whole reason I had it in standby. So I've switched mine over. I don't know if it does it automatically, but as you said, it didn't do it automatically most of the time for me in standby, but it does mean you can go in, manually say, take all updates and do them, and then turn your console off, and it will still... keep downloading, whereas previously it would have stopped.
Sometimes it works, sometimes it just doesn't. Sometimes like it knows that you're going to be over like capacity on your SSD or something, so it can't. Like it's kind of muddy. But
it's not great.
Yeah.
But so essentially they've replaced their Instant On with Energy Saver, which is kind of the closer to what rest mode is on PlayStation now, because it seems like it's not quite as good. PlayStation seems to be able to do more stuff in its rest mode because it's not its fully off state.
Yeah.
But it kind of seems like they've realized they've stuffed up Instant On. They can't just take it away or fix it, but what they could do is improve Energy Saver, because that's now the default out of the box, which it wasn't.
Yeah. And that's including updates over off, air quotes, off time. And they've also reduced the amount of time it takes to turn back on when you
much way quicker. It used to take forever. Like I was looking at that screen, like 8-9 seconds.
And they had to like change the Xbox animation because it was too long for like the time needed to start. So that's like really cool. But yeah, like no one cares about this unless you're like looking at your power bill or you're like a weird nerd about this kind of stuff, which I think it's super interesting. So when it was announced, Ben, I did write about it. So for shame that you didn't.
I didn't care at the time, and until like energy prices are going crazy high now, and no one has any money. I've changed mine over. I think it's worthwhile. I even changed mine. Well, I kind of like how the PlayStation does this more than the Xbox, because Xbox you have to say in its menu, I want to be set onto Energy Saver, and then you just turn console off, and it does that. every time you turn or you hit the power button on your PlayStation menu, it asks you, do you want to go to rest mode or do you want to go power off? And so you can change your mind every time you do it. And it's just a little bit more user-friendly from that point of view. I guess flip side
to an extent.
If you forget to do it, you know what your Xbox will do. Although you know what your PlayStation will do. It will go to rest mode.
Yeah. The rest mode on the PlayStation, though, has... I think there's like timers on the USB slots. So if you're always starting on your PlayStation and it gives you that like slap on the wrist because like your attached external hard drive didn't shut down properly, it's because like it's cut power to it while the PlayStation is in rest mode and off, and like then it just like, and then you have to turn it on and you get that annoying like, how dare you do this kind of thing. So I think you can go into settings and fix that. I think I've fixed that on mine now. So, but
PlayStation needs to relax. When the power goes out, relax PlayStation.
Yeah, like I know. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Is it fine? It's fine. If it's not fine, then you can tell me. But don't give me an error message unless something has catastrophically occurred.
That's a good point. I do have a bunch of games on an external hard drive connected to my Series X. And I did test it in Energy Saver, and it did update a game, but I think that was on the SSD. So I wonder if those external drives are also powered in.
No, they are. They are. The one I have like an 8 terabyte drive on the Xbox downstairs,
and it still works in.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it works as well as that. Like I've said, it's worked. And so like sometimes, yeah, it's weird. It's really hard to explain because like I think we've talked about this in the past before. I had like every game I've ever bought like downloaded for some reason. Yes. And like that was causing issues where like the hard drive was like too full to get an update if it was like a Call of Duty like 80 gig update randomly all of a sudden. So I culled a whole bunch of games that I'd never play again, and it seems to be a little bit better. But occasionally you'll just go downstairs and turn on the Xbox, and there's like 27 updates that just didn't process. It's like, oh crap!
Yeah, every time for me.
Yeah.
But okay, I thought maybe that's why Instant On was using so much more power, but apparently not. So what the hell is it doing with this 20 times more power that it's drawing constantly? No idea. And also, if you're worried about what's it called, quick resume, fast resume, quick resume,
still works.
That still works when you fully. You can actually even unplug your Xbox and plug it back in and resume that game straight away. So that doesn't need power. I don't know what it's doing with all this extra power. If you're trying to save some money, like literally everyone is, change that mode on your Xbox because it's costing you a fortune to not play anything.
Not even if you're trying to save money. If you're trying to save the planet in like the least effective way possible, really, by doing absolutely nothing.
Do you know why I don't pay that? Because Xbox actually says that in the settings on the menu. It says 20 times less power, save the planet or something. This is, you've stuffed something up and you need us to change mode now because Instant On sucks and you've managed to do Energy Saver better and you can't remove it for some reason. Like something's going on there. And someone in the marketing team or the PR team has gone, talk about saving the planet, one Xbox at a time. That'll do it. And yes, there's a minor benefit there. But that's not why they've done this.
The world is in trouble because of the carbon footprints of major corporations, not like my house. But yes, at least I can sleep a little bit better at night knowing I've done my part, I guess.
Yep.
I don't know. We're almost at an hour, dude. We gotta get out of here. How do we find you on the internet?
I am Ben_Salter on Twitter, and we have no delays this week that I'm aware of. Everything's already been delayed, so we don't need our regular segment. We can leave it there once you tell us how we find you.
I'm going to delay myself just for fun. I'm SRightAU on the internet. Please feel free to not engage with me if you want to make a threat against my family members. That'd be great. We'll see you next week.
That's right. See you next week.